And then for those of you that just came in, this is Mr. Moreno, and he is our guest speaker today. And he's going to be sharing some of his story and some words of wisdom to help us out and to hopefully motivate us. And maybe it could be things that you can relate to also during your time at home and virtual learning and any like pandemic related things that you might be experiencing too, or just life things too. So Mr. Moreno, it's all yours.
Thank you. And good morning to everyone. And I want to thank Mrs. Esparza for inviting me here today to speak to you about my life experiences and what I learned along the way. And it is not my intent to preach or to tell you what to do. Instead, I just want to tell you about my very difficult life journey. And from that experience, you might be able to glean or pull some information out or some thoughts that might help you along the way. I served as a Superior Court Commissioner for the County of Los Angeles for over 19 years. I presided over courtrooms that dealt with criminal law, civil law, juvenile delinquency law, and dependency law, which are child abuse cases. Prior to that, I was an attorney. I was a sole practitioner in the city of East Los Angeles, actually the county of East Los Angeles, where I represented only families and individuals. It was like David against Goliath. And before that, I was a milkman. So I went from the barrio of East LA. I was married at 18. That caused me to drop out of college. By the time I was 23, I had 3 children. I then became a milkman, a lawyer, and then a judge. How did I do it? Growing up in East Los Angeles was not easy, especially a kid like me who was born in Douglas, Arizona, which is a border town in the southeast corner of Arizona, surrounded by grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and just a house full of love. And then my parents transported me to East Los Angeles, where I had only my mother and my father, and my father was not there all the time. And my mother was a very gentle soul, was very quiet and very docile. So it was like taking a plant and taking it out of fertile soil and planting it in a desert, in a hostile desert, because I was different. I spoke only Spanish. I was skinny, so I immediately became a target of bullying. Let me share with you one story. I was 5 years old and I was walking down Thrower Drive, the street that I live, when I came to the base of the hugely eroded hill that ran all the way up to the next street, which is Fresno Street. When I came across a rock that was about the size of a baseball, I picked it up and threw it up the hill. There had been a boy walking across the hill that I had not seen, and it came close to him. He turned and glared at me, and I was surprised to see him, so I walked towards him, took a couple of steps, and just held my hands up like this. That gesture really seemed to upset him. He stooped, picked up a rock. I got scared, I froze, and as that rock came at me, everything went into like slow motion. I could actually see the rock coming at me, and I easily dodged it. Then I took another step towards him. That infuriated him. He picked up another rock and threw it at me. That rock hit towards my head, and it came at me like a slow motion, and I easily just moved my head, and it whizzed by my ear. He then turned, picked up another rock, turned around, and threw it sidearm. I saw that rock coming at me, and again, I just saw it moving slow motion, so I turned my head to the right. Unfortunately, that rock had spin on it, and it curved, and it caught me right here above the left eye. I still have a scar there. I remember the world spinning, then everything went black. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but the next thing I remember is opening my eyes, looking up, and seeing adult faces looking down at me. and my father pushing through and sitting me up. And I had to rub my face, my eye, because there was blood everywhere and on my t-shirt. Then my father yelled out, "Who did this?" And somebody pointed up the hill to a house in the middle of the hill. My father took me by the hand and dragged me basically up the hill and towards the front door. And as we were walking towards the front door, I looked at my father and then looked at his right hand, and in his hand he had a knife. And I looked at his face, and he had a very bad look on his face. And I knew that my father had a very bad temper, and that scared me. A shock of fear ran through me. He yelled out, and after a moment, two women walked out, an older one and a younger one. And he yelled out, "Did one of your boys do this?" The older woman then nodded to the younger woman, who then yelled out, "Venga," meaning come here. The door opened and two boys walked out. The first one to walk out was older. I had never seen him before. And then the one who threw the rock, who was younger, but at least 2 years older than I was at that time. My father then asked me, "Did one of these guys do it?" As young as I was at that point, I realized that my father was about to do something bad. He was about to make a very big mistake, and it scared me. And I decided to de-escalate the situation, and I answered, "No." I recall looking up, and the big boy just came out like a wry smile, and it turns out he was kind of like a leader of a group, which I guess that now you would call a gang. And thereafter in the neighborhood, I was pretty much left alone. But over time, I came to realize something about adults, like what I thought my father was about to do. That people make mistakes. We come across situations where we make the wrong decision, or we make bad decisions, or we make mistakes. And especially when I was in dependency court, which dealt with child abuse cases, both as an attorney and then on the bench, I listened to an expert, either a psychiatrist or a psychologist, testify that our actions as adults are many times controlled by the pain and suffering that we experience as children. If a child is beaten by his father, he will probably discipline his children with violence. If a daughter is beaten by her father, or raped or molested by her father, or an uncle, or even a brother, she will choose a man in her adulthood who matches that profile, in the hope by changing that person, she will fix her father. These were expert opinions after years of study and with a lot of experience. So what I'm suggesting is that if anybody has any kind of experience like that, it is really important that you seek out some help, a therapist, because it is like having a garbage bag in a room that you lock. And that garbage bag stays there and it stinks up the place, and it will affect your decisions in your adult life. With the help of an expert who can guide you and has your best interests in life, you can walk into that room, face those events that have hurt you, take care of that garbage, clean out that room, and thereafter you can live your life much fuller and happier. Now, due to that encounter with that boy in the rock, whose nickname was Dedo, whose true name was Alfred, who, by the way, became my friend all the way through high school, even though he was 2 years older than I was, I became acceptable in the neighborhood, but the neighborhood was still dangerous for me, especially when I went out of the neighborhood, like walking home from school. So I was basically assaulted and beat up on many occasions, coming home with a bloody nose or torn shirt or whatever. So my father taught me how to box. Unfortunately, he did not teach me how to fight, and there is a difference. How to fight, I learned out in the street the hard way. In learning how to fight, I learned that many times when I thought I would lose, and these were bullies that were attacking me, that even when I lost afterwards, that bully wouldn't bother me anymore. Because bullies like victims, people who will not fight back. So my suggestion is never allow yourself to be a victim. And one thing I shared with my two sons, that I kept the experience of the times when I didn't fight back at the beginning, and that shame that I felt, that painful shame stayed with me for years into adulthood. But the times that I did fight back, even when I was beat up and came home with bruises and was bleeding, that pain lasted only for a few hours or maybe a few days. And after that, all I felt was pride. So again, don't allow yourself ever to be a target. Now, my father was a womanizer, a gambler, and eventually an alcoholic. I remember times when he lost his entire paycheck and we did not have enough money for food for that week, and sometimes could not pay the rent. Other times he would disappear for days, and eventually he became an alcoholic, a panhandler, and he died in the street. He lost his family, he lost his self-respect, and he lost his life due to addiction. And as I learned again from those psychologists and psychiatrists, is that any addiction, any kind of addiction, is a brain disease, and the only way you can treat it, and it is treatable, is through therapy and the help of experts. Because if you don't treat the addiction, eventually it will destroy your life or kill you. Now, when I was 10, my mother, I guess getting tired of my father, took on a job. It was during the summer. And so they needed daycare and they couldn't find it. So what they did, they signed me up at the Variety Boys Club in Chicago Avenue, just east of Wabash. It was off the corner of Brooklyn and Wabash in East Los Angeles. I recall the first day they'd been dropping me off there at about 8 o'clock in the morning with my bag with my lunch in it and waiting till the doors opened. And that day and the next 3 days, all I did was walk around, lean against the wall, watching boys shoot pool, play ping pong. I walked into the library. I walked upstairs to the wood shop, walked into the gym. And about the third or fourth day, I was standing against the wall watching these two boys play ping pong. When they stopped, one of them turned to me and they asked, "Do you want to play?" I had never played ping pong in my life. And I told them that I don't know how to play. And they told me, "I'll teach you." And they did. And I became very good. And then I enjoyed going to the Variety Boys Club and socializing. And that was a huge lesson because I met boys and from other neighborhoods, different races, and we got along. It taught me how to socialize. But the biggest lesson that I learned through the Variety Boys Club is one day the librarian picked me and I think two other boys, and she gave us each two books. And she instructed us, read these two books, and within the month, no more than 30 days, I want you to return with a written report about the book. I remember the one book I read was entitled A Stone for Danny Fisher. The author is Harold Robbins. It was a book about a boy who was raised in poverty and tough times. That experience allowed me to go into a different time and place and actually have different experiences. So I started reading books like crazy. I loved novels, and then I started reading more books about fighter pilots. That is the greatest gift I could have received, the gift of reading. And that gift stayed with me, and it really helped me at another time that I'll come to in a moment. Now, when I entered Roosevelt High School, I had been intrigued by gymnastics, so I signed up for the gymnastics program. The coach at Roosevelt at that time was Richard Bishop. He had been an Olympian for the United States of America on the rings. I don't know how he ended up in East Los Angeles as our gymnastics coach, but he did, and I'm grateful that he did. As a coach during his tenure, he won at least 7, maybe 10 city championships because he was tough, he was dedicated, and he believed in us, and he kept telling us over and over, you can do this. And then he would show us how to do it. He would have, the old-fashioned reels where he'd show something on the screen, and he put it into slow motion, so it'd go click, 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 and there would be films of gymnasts from Russia and from Japan, who were then the greatest gymnasts in the world. And he would show us each movement, each trick that he wanted us to learn by increments, what the hands did, what the chest did. And then he expected us to do it. And he kept encouraging us to do it, and again, showing us how to do it. And he instilled in us discipline, dedication, and determination to succeed. As a result, I did succeed. Even though I was skinny when I entered, in the 11th grade, I ended up winning the championship on the floor exercise in the Eastern League, second place in the parallel bars. In the city finals, I took fourth place, even though I made a major break on my dismount that should have disqualified me. My compadre and best friend at the time, Sammy Garcia, received a scholarship to USC. And his second year at USC, he competed in the NCAA finals and won first place in the rings. Another gymnast from Roosevelt, Peter Parra, who I played golf with yesterday, went to Cal State, and 3 years later, he competed in NCAA finals and took fourth place. For your information, one that places first to fifth in the NCAA finals are all Americans. So my suggestion to you is get involved in something like a band, sports, anything that requires dedication and something that is difficult to do. But when you accomplish it, you'll find that you have a deep sense of accomplishment that bring a form of happiness to you and possibly even glory. Now, after high school, I enrolled with my girlfriend, who was then 17. She was very bright, at Los Angeles City College. My plan at that time was to compete in gymnastics at LACC, eventually transfer to university, hopefully UCLA, receive a bachelor's degree, then enlist in the Air Force, and I was hoping to become a fighter pilot. But then something happened that caused everything to change. My girlfriend became pregnant, and she wanted to get married, and I loved her. I told my parents about it, and they talked me out of it, or they tried to talk me out of it, but I said, no, this is the right thing to do. This is my child. So at 18, I got married. That caused me to change my plan. I could no longer go to college because I had to survive. The plan was now to find a job that would allow me to pay the rent, be able to pay for the electric bill, food, just to survive. My first job was at a factory where all day I was cutting sheets of fiberglass. It caused a rash on my arm, causing me to quit. I then got a job at Fair Oaks Ford, where my job is to every morning show up like at 7 o'clock in the morning and wash every single car in the lot. And when I was then finished, keep the place clean, then transport people to and from the agency who were having their cars repaired. Then there was a milkman that told my mother that the owner of Eastside Dairies was looking for a driver. I contacted Mr. Bosniak, who was the owner, and he interviewed me. After the interview, he hired me. I was 19. I did not know then that he intended only to keep me for a couple of weeks because I was replacing a man who had cut his hand. Unfortunate for that driver and fortunate for me, it turned out to be far more serious. There were tendons that were cut, required operation, so he stopped for 6 months. Now, when I started there, the foreman, whose name I can't remember now, who was training me, his mantra was, no matter what you do your best. And that mantra stayed with me for the rest of my life, and something that had already been distilled into me by Coach Bishop. As a result, the route that I took over from this man was the worst route at Eastside Dairy. They graded the routes by the number of units that went out, meaning the unit is a quart, and the amount of debt that was in the books. His was the worst. By the time that man came back 6 months later, that route was the best. It went out with the highest number of units and the lowest debt on the books. As a result, I was kept on at Eastside Dairy, even though I was only 19. I was now a member of the Teamsters. I learned way later on that what Mr. Bosniak did, he lied to the Teamsters and said I was 21, which was a requirement to be a member of the Teamsters then. But I now had enough money to survive, to pay the bills. And so I started taking classes again. And eventually I had enough classes to come close to an AA degree. I think it was about a semester short. But during the time I was taking those classes, I did not know what I wanted to do with my life. I took some engineering where I studied algebra and trigonometry and calculus, but I flunked drafting. That gave me a clue I couldn't make it as an engineer or as an architect. So I even tried accounting and even considered maybe a teacher or a social worker. I did not know what I wanted to do. So I contacted the counselor at East LA who gave me an aptitude test. After the results came in, he called me into his office, and then he said he went over the results and told me there are some things you definitely cannot do, but there are many things you can. So have you ever thought of becoming a lawyer? That stunned me. It was like he slapped me across the face. My jaw went slack. And he saw that. In my entire life, nobody, my father, my mother, my grandparents, friends, uncles, nobody had ever suggested to me that I could possibly become a lawyer. I was shy and somewhat quiet. He then opened the drawer, pulled out a book and handed it to me. And he gave me an instruction, told me, read this book over the summer. And then when the semester starts, sign up for the business law class. I read that book, To Kill a Mockingbird, and was really impressed by Atticus, the main character, and how he took on the whole basics of society that I viewed as bullies, and decided maybe I could be a lawyer. The business law class that I signed up for at East LA was taught by attorney Carlos Velarde. I was the oldest student in that class. As a result, during the breaks, he and I would sit and have coffee together and we would talk. And after a while, he took an interest in me and he asked me what were my plans for the future. And I told him that I was a milkman. I wake up about 3:30 every morning, go to work, and then at night go to school. I had about one more semester to go to get an AA degree. Then I would go and get my Bachelor of Arts degree in something, I didn't know what, and then go on to law school at night. It would take me like 4 years to finish law school. And he shook his head and he told me, Armando, you will never make it. You're married, you have 3 kids, you have a tough job with tough hours, you will be exhausted, you will never make it. I suggest you take the equivalency examination given by the state bar. If you pass it, that means you have the equivalent education of a 2-year education, and you could get into an unaccredited law school. The only difference between an accredited and an unaccredited law school is that then you have to take the baby year after your first year, and if you pass it, you could go on and finish your law school and get your law degree and hopefully pass the bar, which is another huge hurdle. I recall going home, and this is something that really stunned me, and sharing with my wife that I was thinking of becoming a lawyer and getting into law school. And she told me no. I was stunned. Why? And she told me, if you go to law school, I will leave you. And again, I told, why? I'm doing this for me, for you, and for the family. And her response is, no, you're doing this for yourself. I just shook my head and didn't know what to say. She walked away. But that left a huge doubt in my mind and a decision. And then I started rationalizing. It'll take me at least 4 years. So by that time, I'll be 32. So when I went back to class the next night, when it was on, at the break, Carlos asked me, "What did you decide?" And I told him, "I don't think I can make it, Carlos. I don't think I have what it takes to be a lawyer." And he told me, "Look, I've been practicing law and I went through law school, and I can tell you, yes, you can. You can be a lawyer and you're getting an A in this class. So put that aside." I said, "Well, Carlos, but look, if I go to law school, it'll take me 4 years. By that time, I'll be 32. Then I'll never forget his response. He looked at me and asked me a question. "Okay, so in 4 years, if you don't go to law school, how old will you be?" Excuse me. Carlos became a lifelong, lifelong friend. and, and excuse me, he passed away a couple of years ago.
Take your time, Mr. Moreno. Thank you for allowing yourself to be vulnerable too. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
But but if you take anything out of this, is just remember that time is an asset. You can't waste it. And no matter what you do, that time is going to go by. So use your time effectively. I signed up for that equivalency examination, but I didn't inquire about what it was about and what was required. When I arrived at that site that was going to be given on a Saturday, I think it was at LA High School, I drove into the rear parking lot and I was shocked. Everywhere in the parking lot were cars with people inside, sitting on top of the hood, sitting on the steps in groups and bunches. All of them had books and notebooks and papers. They were studying. And I said, "Oh, crap." But I took the test. I walked in. It was an all-day test with a lunch break. And that test was a college entrance exam. It had everything. It had algebra. It had history, social studies, art, English, an essay in the Vietnam War, and I can't remember what else. It took all day. I passed. And I contribute that to continue my studies, even though I did not know what to do. So I had acquired all this knowledge and my love of reading that I learned through the Righty Boys Club. So whatever you do in life, continue your education. Never stop learning. As Sir Francis Bacon said, knowledge is power. Now, I started law school the next semester at California College of Law. That law school was started by Judge Egley, who we call Dean Egley. He was a judge in Pomona, and it was located on the second floor of a small building, commercial building in West Covina, next to a gas station. Dean Egley the next year started the law school at Laverne University. Now, because of my grade point average, I could transfer, and I did. During law school, time again became critical, and it became so super clear to me how important time is. I didn't have enough time. I was waking up at 3:30. I was actually had the books in my truck. Even when I went to the bathroom, I had books. Every minute was valuable and important. I didn't waste a second of time. I graduated, I passed the bar, and became an attorney. And dealing with time, you have the opposite problem. I would suggest to you that you have too much time in your hand. And maybe you should consider not wasting that time, but setting a schedule for yourself daily and even weekly and even monthly with a calendar, and set aside time for fun, enjoyment, but also for education and also for physical exercise and something spiritual and something family. because you need those three tripods in life. You need the education, you need the physical, and you need the spiritual. What I learned in engineering is that a tripod is absolutely steady, it's solid. You can put it inside of the hill and it's balanced. And that's what can give you balance in life. For example, if you make a chair, it's got 4 feet, it'll be wobbly. It's very difficult to make it solid. But a tripod, no, it's solid. So some suggestions is yoga, something I took up several years ago, and I lost a bet. And it surprised me in a beginner's class. After an hour, I was sweating bullets and I was sore for 3 days. But now, as old as I'm getting, every morning I get up, because for a while there, I was not going to be able to play golf because my low back was killing me. I then tried a plank, and it surprised me that the pain was in my low back. Now I can do a plank and hold it for maybe 25 breaths. I tried a push-up, and mind you, in gymnastics, I could do a headstand and then from there push straight up into a handstand. I tried a push-up that I hadn't done in, 25 years. I couldn't do 3. Now I can back up to 20 push-ups and I can play golf. But, continue with your education and make a plan. Make a plan for yourself and always be true to yourself, whatever happens. Now, as a sole practitioner, I represented only families and individuals against companies, people with money, insurance companies. It was like David against Goliath. But I did my best for every single individual that I represented. And when I came across a situation where it would require an investment of money because it would require hiring an expert witness and my client didn't have it, I spent the money because I treated my clients like they were my family. And if they couldn't afford to pay, I paid. As a result, I had about a 90+% winning rate, even though I was a sole practitioner and I was coming up against some huge companies. I recall one company in particular where the letterhead had about 20 people, and the third one was the attorney against me, and he had clerked for one of the Superior Court judges in California. And he walked into my office, second floor, looking out into the alley with trash cans. And after the deposition, he asked me, let me have a moment with you, please. He said, how did you get this case? Because it was a very severe injury case. And I told him, I'm a family practitioner and I've represented the family in numerous cases. Then he handed me a check. Here's $30,000. I suggest you tell your client to take it because you'll never make a penny more. It took me 4 years to get that case to trial, but the verdict was $650,000. $650,000. Now, as an attorney, I became an expert in juvenile dependency, which are child abuse cases. And I found that I was being sent to one court where Paul Bolin sat. Paul Bolin had been a professor at UCLA and he's now a judge. And because I was an expert in that area, some very tough cases were being assigned to that courtroom. And we had many confrontations, but a mutual respect eventually developed. And Paul Bolin is a person that appointed me a referee as needed. There are 3 levels of bench officers in LA County. You can be a referee. As a referee, you can sit on the bench as needed, wherever they need somebody to run the court, but you can still be practicing law. After that, there's a commissioner. You can no longer practice law because you are now a member of the judiciary. You could no longer be an attorney. And there is a judge. The difference between a judge and a commissioner is that a judge is appointed by the governor or elected by the people. A commissioner is appointed by a panel of the judges sitting in LA County. When I was appointed, something like 350 people made the list of 20. I came in up number 7 on the list. Eventually what happened, and I believe in omens also, I had not been able to sit full time, and they would many times offer me to sit full time, but I couldn't accept that offer because I couldn't afford it. I was paying child support and I was paying alimony. My son then came to live with me. So the child support payment stopped. Then the alimony payment stopped. That same month, the Children's Court in Monterey Park opened. I took that as a sign. So I contacted Jaime Corral, who was then the presiding judge of Juvenile in LA County, and I asked him if I could sit full-time in Monterey Park. He invited me over and showed me around, and I had a choice of 4 different courtrooms where I could sit. And I chose Department 415 because I recalled that Penal Code Section 415 is disturbing the peace. Something silly, but it's something that I remember. In that practice, I excelled. And again, the attorneys, I always allowed them to speak, but many times, because these were very emotional cases, I could not tell if they were making the argument based upon emotion or based upon facts. And so I would instruct the attorneys who were panels, or some very few times private attorneys would come in, or county counsel, or panel attorneys that were basically 3 separate offices. They did nothing but specialize in juvenile law. So I had constant contact with these people, and I started giving them instructions. And I told them, look, when you're making your argument, I can't tell where the emotion ends and the facts and logic begin. So please leave the emotion out and just give me the facts and the logic. And by the way, I use the same technique when I view Fox News or MSNBC. You have to look at what's behind things and look at the logic. In 1998, the LA County Bar Association awarded me Outstanding Judge of the Year, even though I was a commissioner and I was competing against judges. In January 1st, 2012, I retired from the bench. I retired due to health reasons because of the stress that I was going through. At that time, I was running basically 4 calendars, all civil, in Whittier, an assignment that they had been promised me and finally gave me because I only lived like 4 blocks from the courthouse. But my cardiologist had been after me, look, the stress can eventually kill you, so you should retire. So when the county offered a parachute, a golden parachute, I took it. Sometimes I wish I hadn't. I'd like to go back on the bench, but I can't. So let me leave you with some thoughts. I could never have made it without the help of people I met on this journey called life. And always remember, you don't choose your family, but you do choose your friends. And on a lighter note, a family is like fudge, a little sweet with a lot of nuts in it. So deal with it and just keep going. Now, we all need each other. People are tribal, and we should love one another. But always remember, you are not alone. If you are trying and you are struggling to achieve and to succeed, other people will see it and they will help you. And the reason for that is people like winners. And someone who is struggling and trying to achieve is a winner. Always love yourself. Follow your natural gifts and talents, whatever that may be. And for some of us, it could take a while to determine what that might be. It took me into my 20s before I discovered it. Decide what you want to do with your life. Set a plan to reach that destination and do it in steps by employing the 4 Ds. 1, set that destination. That's your plan. And by the way, and set up, don't try to get there right away because that's usually impossible. Make steps that are achievable, small steps. Because you finish a small step, it's easy, it gives you a sense of accomplishment, you go on. If you go too big, you'll get discouraged and disappointed. So take those small steps. And always remember, there is no such thing as failure. Failure is only a prelude to success. So if the first time you don't do it, keep doing it, keep working it. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it. And the more difficult some job or some technique is, whether you're a plumber, a welder, or whatever it is, a lawyer, an engineer, a doctor, a nurse, I don't care where you end up, always do your best. And those 4 Ds: destination, discipline, determination, and dedication. Those will carry you and get you to where you want to go. I suggest you get into the arena of life. There was a poem, I think, by Roosevelt or something that my mother gave me that you should read. I tried to find it, I couldn't. And never waste the asset of time. Time, once that grain falls through that hourglass, it's gone. And before you know it, you're looking in the mirror wondering, who is that old guy staring back at me? Or woman. Don't waste your time. It will go by no matter what you do. So make your time effective. And no matter what obstacle you come across, and there will be obstacles and there will be crossroads, there is always a way to overcome the obstacle. And when you come to a crossroads, a tough decision, which one do I take? Just remember, be true to yourself, use morality, and consider the consequences of your choice, and then go ahead with your decision. Thank you for your time. If there are any questions, be happy to answer them.
That was awesome. Well, I mean, I just want to thank you for honoring us with sharing your life and also your life knowledge and allowing yourself to be vulnerable. I mean, I think just even seeing you kind of struggling with some of your story about losing your friend, like, just brings it home and makes it reality for a lot of people of how much you allowed yourself to be vulnerable in sharing your story. So I do, let's see, I have one question from Amaya. She says, what was the hardest part in being a lawyer?
Learning how to practice law. Let me explain that. When you go to law school, they teach you how to think and they teach you the law, but they don't teach you how to practice law. Going in front of jury, that's an art form. That's totally different. If you become like a salesman, but you use your knowledge, you have to really immerse yourself in the case and immerse yourself in the law. And for every argument, that's why when you see lawyers, they argue a case, it sounds great. Then you hear the other lawyer, boy, that sounds great. You can find law that will support either position. So the most difficult part for me, especially since I went out and hung up my plaque and started taking in cases right away, again, was time. Because I needed the time to research each and every case and do a good job for my client. Time is so important. Don't waste it.
Yeah.
I'll give you, let me share one story with you to show you how green I was. The first time I got I must have been practicing like 2 months, didn't know a thing about drunk driving, but I went to the public defender's office and talked to the head there, and he gave me a whole bunch of paperwork and stuff to study about defense of drug cases. So that I started studying that. I showed up for the arraignment, and there's a huge court downtown, which I eventually, actually, many years later, I was actually sitting in as a commissioner. But when I arrived there, I went to the clerk and I saw the bench, and there were 3 attorneys on that side and 3 attorneys on this side. There were 2 bailiffs and like 4 clerks, and must have been 100 people in the audience. And I went up to the clerk, and she looked at me and says, "Card counsel." And I didn't know what she meant, so I pulled out my wallet and gave her my bar card. And she looked up at me and smiled, gave me back my bar card. She said, "No, your business card. And you want to go talk to that guy over there, he's county counsel, that's where you start." That trial lasted 4 days, and I got a hung jury, green as grass. And he had a .23. That's high. So just work your cases.
Thank you. So I don't see any other questions, but I do want to encourage you to, Mr. Moreno, when you get a chance to just look at the chat. There was a lot of dialogue back and forth, just affirming what you were saying. A lot of students and some of the staff, like just really relating to what you're saying. So it's more for you just to see that, you know, what you were saying was being received. So I'm going to go ahead and stop recording this if there are no other questions. Tristan does say that your smile is contagious.
Well, thank you. And thank you to everyone, and stay safe.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.